There's a quote from Dune that I think about very often. Once, men turned their thinking over to machines in the hope that this would set them free, but that only permitted other men with machines to enslave them. That is, in my opinion, the most important quote that Frank Herbert wrote about the Butlerian Jihad, one of the most important events in the Dune universe, where humans rose up against and eradicated all thinking machines. We're gonna come back to this because Dune Prophecy is happening in the wake of that, when humans needed to evolve and find ways to advance their own abilities without this technology. It's what spurred the Bene Gesserit, the Mentats, and the Spacing Guild. 10,000 years before Paul Atreides, because people need to know this is Dune, this is the Dune that you know and love. You guys know I don't cover much TV on this channel, but I do Dune, and as a huge Dune fan, I'm gonna watch anything Dune related and want to talk about it, even if I was very skeptical about this as something not helmed by Denis Villeneuve. And I was lucky enough to see it at the premiere in New York. They only showed the first episode there as well, and so I walked out thinking, okay, whatever, it's like an hour of exposition and character introductions. It's hard to make any judgment calls, but it seems like there's some interesting things being set up. And also, after all this fear that they were gonna Game of Thronesify Dune, it actually reminded me more of The Witcher. I don't know if anyone else sees that. It's sometimes more than other times. Maybe it's just the school of witches and that Jodie May is in both of them. And I love The Witcher, full disclosure, but it definitely can have sometimes that YA or CW feel to it that I think pops up a couple of times here. But as far as prestige television goes, especially in this era where we're getting a prequel series for like every big sci-fi / fantasy franchise, they've got a great writing team, a lot of people who are involved with things like Westworld, Mr. Robot. It's very aesthetically pleasing. It definitely seems like they tried to stay as in line as they could with Denis Villeneuve's interpretation. But of course, thinking this was ever going to be on the level of Denis Villeneuve's films was always a losing game. We're not only losing Denis, but this isn't even the original Dune series anymore. And I want to touch a little bit on why some people are frustrated with the fact that they're adapting from the prequel series that Frank Herbert's son Brian Herbert co-wrote with Kevin J. Anderson. This is loosely based on Sisterhood of Dune, which is the installment of that's about the founding of the Bene Gesserit. So a lot of this skepticism is coming from the fact that people do not love what they did with Dune. A lot of people argue over whether it's canon or not. The writing itself is a huge step down from Frank Herbert, in my opinion, but what also pisses people off is that Brian Herbert took this really nuanced idea about AI and stagnation and humans creating this dystopia that Frank Herbert alluded to, especially in that quote I mentioned about humans using machines to enslave other humans, and kind of turned it into like evil sentient robots. It's more complicated than that, but that's kind of the gist. And I guess the good news with that is that it seems like we won't see the Butlerian Jihad in the show beyond a few flashbacks that, as we saw, it's very generic sci-fi looking stuff. I at least hope that we don't, because I was not a huge fan of that interpretation. So what I find most exciting is that it seems like they aren't really adhering strictly to the source material. The flashback that we see in the beginning of the episode with young Valia covers most of what happens in Sisterhood of Dune. So it seems like we'll be returning in flashbacks to this period with young Valia, but at least in the modern storyline when she's older. This is after the events of Sisterhood of Dune, and it seems like they're using similar storylines and characters to the book, but setting it in the future and mishmashing it up a little bit. So for book readers, there are a lot more surprises to be had with plot and character developments, but there's also a lot of freedom for them to do something interesting thematically, which we're already kind of seeing. I really loved the line where Desmond Hart compares the Bene Gesserit to the thinking machines, saying it's just another form of being controlled. And this is where we're getting into spoilers, even though we haven't learned a whole lot, but there are some things that happen towards the end of the episode. So if you don't want to be spoiled, you haven't watched yet, this is your official warning. But we essentially have the Bene Gesserit, House Carino, and as we learn by the end of the episode, after Desmond Hart literally cooks the kid into Kasha, there's also an unknown force, something actively messing with the Bene Gesserit's plan. After Reverend Mother Rakella passed away, Valia kind of went full fanatic, really intent on getting the whole sisterhood on board with this network of control and getting a sister on the throne for the first time, which they're intending to do with Inez Carino. She's a match in their secret genetic archive. The same one that ultimately does lead them to Paul in the Kwisatz Haderach. Valia is also very motivated by this historic Atreides-Harkonnen feud that it seems like they're gonna start centering more. Desmond Hart not only presumably used some kind of technology to kill Pruitt and Kasha, but he's planting this seed in Emperor Haviko's head that his trusted advisors might have their own agenda and might be behind this attack that happened on Arrakis. If you want to get in really deep, when Reverend Mother Rakella is dying, she mentioned a vision of Tiran Arafel, which relates to the God Emperor and this reckoning that they're talking about. I highly recommend Quinn's Ideas if you want to know like the deep details about this. His videos are very lore forward, and he's just an awesome creator. But that's what I took away as the bigger threads that we should be following here. And we meet a lot of other characters. We see Inez do CGI space cocaine. We'll see what ends up being important as the show goes on. I may be most excited to see with how they deal with the different schools of thought on thinking machines and how a lot of people don't want to follow these absolutist restrictions. There were some interesting things in the preview for the rest of the season as well. What caught my eye is that they're going to continue doing tests on sisters to try and create more Reverend mothers, because at this time it's still being figured out. It's a very deadly process. And it looks like we get more flashbacks to Valia being younger and maybe going through that process herself. So I'm here for it. I'm going to continue watching. There are some interesting things at play here. So we'll see if it ends up crashing and burning or if it ends up being surprisingly thrilling, even if maybe not quite on par with Denis Villeneuve's stuff. And again, I don't do a lot of TV, so if you're watching or plan to watch, please let me know what kind of things you'd like to see discussed, if you want to get more into the lore or kind of talk about things as they're unraveling in the show, etc., etc. I'm not quite done with the book yet, but I'm hoping to be done by the time the second episode comes out. Will it even matter that I have read it? We'll see. But if you have delved into the Brian Herbert books, let me know what you think of how they're adapting it so far, what you thought of the first episode. Are you going to stick with it? But we will be talking about the episodes every week, so don't forget to like and subscribe and keep an eye out for more videos soon. Thanks for watching.